Kris Dunn has been one of those staple pieces of the Utah Jazz roster during the tumultuous 2023-2024 season, where they finished the year out 31-51. Things got really competitive in the beginning, and it was in big part because Will Hardy decided to start Kris Dunn alongside Collin Sexton in that backcourt. Things kind of edged off, and they ended up going with Keyonte George to give him some rookie minutes, and also because they didn't plan on, quite honestly, making the playoffs or being a play-in team to begin with when the season was underway. That said, Kris Dunn has reached a point where he is proving he is a legitimate NBA point guard that deserves to be on somebody's roster. With his contract having ended at the conclusion of this season, he now becomes a free agent, and the question becomes, will the Jazz re-sign him? I myself am a proponent for keeping Kris Dunn because he brings that added edge and that extrovertedness from a veteran leader at the age of 30 who's been around the league, whether it be from injuries or different situations that prevented him from seeing the peak of his career, as he was the 5th overall pick of the 2016 draft to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Standing at 6'3" and 205 pounds, he provides himself as being the ideal traditional guard at the point guard spot that also is really solid on the defensive side of the ball. And that's where he makes most of his money. That's where he ended up earning a 10-day contract with the Jazz the previous season, and then bagged a second 10-day contract at the conclusion of that before signing a deal that carried him out through the remainder of that season and this one that just closed out. Overall, he played in 66 games for the Utah Jazz this past season, averaging 5.4 points, 2.9 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 0.4 blocks, and 1 steal per game to go along with just 1.2 turnovers. He did so while shooting 47% from the field and 36.9% from the three-point line to go along with 68.8% from the free throw line on limited free throw attempts. I say that to say that Kris Dunn has been a really important role player for this roster. He did play in a significant portion of games, but there was also a lot of games where he played a couple minutes at the end of the game or didn't play at all, and he never once complained. There are a lot of people that recognize and feel as though they are capable of starting on a lot of teams or feel like they should be earning 20 to 30-ish minutes coming off of the bench, and they will make a fuss about that. But Kris Dunn wasn't one of those guys. He was a true professional through the season when they were at their highs and when they were at their lows, and honestly, it speaks volumes to who he is as a player and why the Utah Jazz should attempt to keep him around. Now, keeping him isn't going to be too costly because, again, he does serve as more of a in-between guy that is a point of attack defender and very effective at it, but also doesn't provide much offensive upside outside of being the floor general that passes the ball around. Though he does have the ability to get to his own shot, he understood that his role, at least with the Utah Jazz, was going to be as a distributor of the ball and a maintainer on defense. This is something that was very important, and he took that job on full steam ahead with complete pride. There was no shadow of a doubt where you felt like Kris Dunn should not have deserved to have been on the floor, because even when he wasn't hitting his shots, he was taking such a small number of shots that it never really affected what was going on in the game. And when he was hitting, he let you know because he hit a little bit more. All in all, Kris Dunn was very effective at his job, just being the floor general when he was on the court, particularly in offensive sets that involved him being on the court with Lauri Markkanen, because as we know, most of Lauri's three-point attempts were assisted by a guard on his team. As a result, for a significant portion of the season, Kris Dunn was one of those guards that was leading things. He also shared a significant amount of time on the court with Keyonte George, who was a rookie this past season. And honestly, I like the tendencies that Kris Dunn had that rubbed off on Keyonte. Now, Keyonte still has a significant portion of growth left to do, as his shooting splits were abysmal for the majority of the season, and his playmaking came and went. But defensively, he did seem to buy in a lot more as the season went on, and his playmaking, though it did come and go, showed a lot of hot flashes, and even his shooting showed flashes at times. I felt as though Kris Dunn was a leader that was necessary for his growth at the time, and I would hate to see him go at this point now. With Keyonte George needing to learn how to play the lead guard spot, there's no guy on the roster better to show him than a Kris Dunn or Collin Sexton kind of guy. And considering the fact that Kris Dunn is more ideal and closer to the height of Keyonte George, who's listed as 6'4", and Kris Dunn is 6'3", Keyonte George can learn how to properly play defense, how to properly position himself on that side of the ball by being alongside Kris Dunn. The fact that Kris Dunn also doesn't expect to play a significant amount of minutes and doesn't complain so much when it comes to his contract situation just also speaks to the type of professional that he is, and also clearly dictates that he should be kept around and it won't be expensive to do so at the slightest. At the trade deadline, the Utah Jazz ended up trading away several players, being Kelly Olynyk, Ochai Agbaji, and even Fontecchio, and many people suggested that Simone Fontecchio got traded away because it was going to cost them upwards of $18 to $20+ million to retain him on a contract, and they didn't want to spend that money. Kris Dunn's going to be significantly less costly and still fills a necessary niche, which is going to be from a leadership standpoint and also just being the total veteran presence that ends up doing all the things that you want him to do while also keeping all the little negatives to the side. I personally feel as though he didn't receive his fair shake throughout the season, and I did want to see this team achieve as much as they potentially could have. And with Kris Dunn at the point guard spot, it really balanced out the way Collin Sexton was, because Collin Sexton, despite his tenacious effort on the defensive side of the ball, he's a pretty short guy that doesn't have the most length. So sometimes he would be in the perfect defensible position and he just couldn't get a stop because he was little. Kris Dunn ultimately was more successful in those situations and made it hard for a lot of other teams' best guard players when they were on the court alongside him. He took it personal on that side of the ball, and as a person that loves good defense myself, I had a great appreciation for it, considering the fact that for the majority of the season, and particularly when the Jazz started to enter their play all the young guys / soft tank phase, there was very little defense that was being successfully played. Now, were the guys on the court and were they guarding people? Of course. But the numbers, percentages, and points put up by our opponents during the second half of the season after the trade deadline show that there was much to be desired. I do believe that Kris Dunn will end up being on some NBA roster at the beginning of next season, but I would love for him to be able to stay with the Utah Jazz, considering that he has made a name for himself and he's become a big part of the culture that the locker room does have, even though they kind of gutted it at the trade deadline. He is the guy that's going to stand up for his teammates, but he's also going to hold everybody accountable, and he's also going to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations with the coaches of Will Hardy and the other guys on that staff. At the same time, he's not so disorderly that he gets in the way of the processes of the team and the organization as a whole, and he stands as a pillar of understanding and knowledge that all the young guards and even some of the young forwards can come talk to in regards to their play, their understanding of the offensive sets and defensive techniques, and just learn how they should exist and come correct as professional NBA players early on in their careers, being that he has such a significant portion of his career already behind him and he's understood what it takes to get to the stage that he's been at and sustain that level of success, as well as face adversity along the way. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're a Utah Jazz fan, would you like to keep Kris Dunn or do you think we should let him walk? And if you're a fan of another team, do you think that Kris Dunn might be a nice addition to add to your roster? Let me know in the comments below. With that being said, it's your boy Wraith Hoops. Go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and become a member of the channel to help support the content. With that being said, good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're on the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.